So let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's program to discuss anti-Asian violence and hate arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Karen King. I'm counsel at Paul Weiss in the litigation department, and I'm also vice chair of the Albany Pro Bono and Community Service Committee, who is sponsoring this webinar along with the Albany Government Service and Public Interest Committee. Before we begin the actual program, there are a few logistical items to address. As you know, today's webinar does qualify for CLE credit. Albany, New York is certified by the New York State Continuing Legal Education Board as an accredited provider. This program has been approved in accordance with the requirements of the CLE board for a maximum of 1.5 credit hours toward the diversity and inclusion requirement. You have to be a non-transitional New York attorney, of course, to receive this credit. This program did require pre-registration and confirmation for the CLE credit. The first page of the written materials is an attorney affirmation that must be completed and returned to cle@albany.org. 2 codes will be announced during the program. Please record the codes on the attorney affirmation and then return the affirmation as soon as possible within a week after this program has concluded. Albany will then send you your certificate. You also should have received a link for an online evaluation for the session, and we would certainly appreciate any feedback you have so that we can continue to improve the programs. We are recording this webinar for archival purposes. Your continued attendance on this Zoom constitutes consent to transmit, record, and use your voice and image for this purpose. So without further delay, let me introduce our esteemed panel. First, we have Dr. Russell Zhang. Dr. Jeung is a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. He's also the author of several books and articles on race and religion, including Family Sacrifices, The Worldviews and Ethics of Chinese Americans, which was published last year. In 2020, Dr. Jeung launched Stop AAPI Hate, a joint project of Chinese for Affirmative Action, the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council, and San Francisco State Asian American Studies. It is a reporting center that tracks COVID-19 related discrimination in order to develop community resources and policy interventions to fight racism. Next, we have John P. Yang, who is the president and executive director of Asian Americans at Advancing Justice, AAJC, whose mission is to fight for civil rights and empower Asian Americans to create a more just America through public policy advocacy, education, and litigation. He's an experienced attorney and a leader in the Asian American and Pacific Islander and broader civic community, including as a co-founder of the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center in DC. And next, let me introduce Deputy Inspector Stewart Liu of the NYPD. He's a commanding officer of the Manhattan South Detectives Group 2 and currently commanding officer of the Asian Hate Crime Task Force created by the NYPD just last month. He was raised in Nassau County, a graduate of SUNY Stony Brook University, and he's been with the NYPD for 20 years. So thank you so much for joining us, Deputy Inspector.
Thank you for having me.
Next, let me introduce Joanne Yu, who is the Executive Director of the Asian American Federation, AAF, which is a nonprofit membership organization that works with nearly 70 nonprofits representing and supporting the Pan-Asian community. She has an extensive background in community activism and advocacy, particularly in development projects and immigrant rights. She has also served on numerous boards, including the nonprofit New York and Advocacy Institute, the New York State AARP's Diversity Council, the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development, the YMCA of Queens, and Korean Americans for Political Advancement. And finally, last but not least, Joe Kim is Deputy Bureau Chief in the County Court Bureau of Nassau County District Attorney's Office, and he's been a prosecutor for over 16 years. Over his career, he has indicted and tried violent gang and other felony cases, robberies, and he has also prosecuted many hate crimes, including robbery as a hate crime, and has been actively involved in matters relating to bias incidents with the APA community. ADA GIM is a longtime Albany member and presently co-chair of the Prosecutors Committee. So thank you all panelists for joining our discussion this morning. And so let's just jump right into it and start with what the data is showing, how how stories and incidents have been reported, and what we're finding over the last few months. And given that Stop API Hate has been one of the leading collectors of information and reports from the Asian American community, let me start with you, Professor Jeung. Can you give us a little bit of information about what the data is showing so far going through the present over the last 6 months?
Thanks, Karen, and good morning, everyone. We're in California this morning, and the wildfire smoke is actually going to get worse again this weekend, so it's pretty bad. So we started Stop API Hate in March, and to date we have over 2,600 incidents. I have a slide, if possible, if I could share it. National data to New York's. And for us, most of the 70% of the incidents are actually hate incidents and not hate crimes. And so there are cases of verbal harassment, but they're not mere microaggressions or cases of virulent racial taunting, a lot of profanities. About 30% hate speech, like "go back to China, you effing chink." Another 20% are actually cases of shunning, so that's sort of the deliberate avoidance of people. But for youth, that's really isolating and actually has a lot of impact on them. Yeah, if I could share, I'd appreciate it, Margaret. 8% are civil rights violations, being treated at the workplace, being not being able to enter establishments. In New York, there's a lot of denial of ride shares in New York. And 8% are physical assaults, and they can constitute hate crimes. If you could show that there was racial bias involved in those physical assaults. So here you can see the data now, and the other interesting trend is that Asians are being called upon often. It's a higher rate than the nation. It's my wife was running and someone actually blocked her path and deliberately coughed on her, and a public health threat at this moment, and it's happening on an alarming scale. We only had 2,600 self-reported incidents, but we just did a survey in California, a really good random sample, and it said about 6% of Asians in California experienced direct racism. And that doesn't sound like much, but in California, we have so many Asians, that's over 300,000 incidents. And 7 to 8 month period, that's what, over 40,000 a month, or over 10 to 12,000 a day. So that's just in California. This is widespread. We had incidents across the nation, 47 states reporting. Women get harassed 2.5 times more than men. And so it's clear people are bullying whom they think is elderly, children, and women. And I could talk more about the data, but you can see in New York, higher rates of harassment, coughing on people, and physical assault.
Has it been a steady stream just since earlier this year? I think, was it March that this started being collected, over the months, or have there been any sort of changes in the pattern?
It's been pretty steady. There was a major uptick when Trump began to use the term Chinese virus in March. But it could be that people were reporting a lot more back then, and because it was such a highlighted issue. But
Sorry, Professor, you've frozen a little bit. Give him a second. All right, I think we have oh, Professor, are you back? We lost you for just a few seconds there.
The trends have, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, the trends have been steady. We've had a steady reporting numbers, and the groups reporting have been steady. So, for example, elderly make up 1 out of 9 incidents. So you don't think of Asian seniors going online and complaining about mistreatment, but they are, because they clearly understand what it means to face racism and to want to report it.
Have you gotten much feedback from the community or law enforcement about this project that you undertook earlier this year, and how it's had an effect on how people view the issue?
Yeah, I think most people recognize that it is an issue. You know, Grace Ming's resolution brought a lot of attention to. Of course, Republicans didn't vote to denounce anti-Asian racism, but both the House and Senate resolutions and used our data. In California, we've traction with our policymakers. The governor worked with us, and we're working a lot with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing to address civil rights violations. We're working with the state superintendent of schools to address youth harassment. So at least in California, we have more access, and we're working a lot more with state agencies.
John, I know your organization has also done some data collection, and I'm wondering if you've seen similar reports and similar breakdown in what your organization has collected.
Sure. Thanks very much, Karen. And I think that's exactly right. So Dr. Jung's data is more robust than our data, but collectively, if you look at that data, it's the same trends. So likewise, ours is similar, but probably only about 10% involve some sort of physical assault or physical altercation. Most of them do involve verbal slights of various sorts. The two things that I would point out, and I'm glad Dr. Jeung pointed these out as well, is I do see a pattern with respect to when this is in the media or when people use these words and the uptick in reports. And there may be two reasons for that, as Dr. Jeung pointed out. So if you think about back in, I think, the late June, when President Trump had a rally in Arizona and made fun of the use of the word Kung Flu at that rally, we actually saw a decent uptick in the number of incidents that were being reported to our website. The other thing that I've noticed is at the beginning, whether it's mid-February or so, when we started seeing these trends, to now, I've seen increased use of the words Chinese virus or Kung Flu. Whereas originally, the verbal harassment usually was just go back to China, you guys are carriers of the disease, right? Now it's been more focused on Chinese virus. So again, I want to be careful about what conclusions we draw from that, but it does suggest that words matter. It does suggest that people are taking their cues from our, I'm going to say, so-called leaders with respect to these types of issues. The last thing I would note, and I would ask for everyone's help on, is Representative May was great about introducing the resolution, got passed in the House. Frankly, she's gotten a huge amount of hate mail and hate because of that. And so I would ask everyone to help support her and just give her encouragement. Obviously, she's been a fearless leader on this, but our community needs to let her know and let the rest of our community know that we have everyone's back during these times.
So Joanne, I know you have worked deeply with the Asian American community, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on whether or not people are reporting, if the numbers that are coming into these collections reflect the depth of the problem, and whether or not there's more behind the scenes that isn't reflected in the data.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. I think the real hero here is Dr. Jeung, obviously, calling from a 3-hour time difference, right? So it's so great to finally meet you, Dr. Jeung, and to my friend, fellow, my co-conspirator in all things, John Yang. It's so great to see you guys. I just want to echo what John and Dr. Jeung said, because we formed a 3-state, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, reporting site as well after Dr. Jeung, and we really used his model. And we got a lot of help from his side as well as himself. And everything they're saying is right. Like, what we're seeing in New York is, it's been really frustrating. I'll be honest. I think I've just turned into I've turned into a person that my staff don't recognize, because I've turned into this ogre where I am completely fearless about calling out what isn't being addressed in our community. I mean, I think any kind of reporting is good. Our website, we've had about 100 people report, and I'm sure there's a lot of cross-referencing. And I've also, at the time when New York's NYC, not the Asian hate crimes division, but the regular hate crimes folks were saying, oh my God, we'd get on all of these various Zoom things, and they would say, oh my gosh, I only have 7 cases reported. And I'm thinking, and for me to say, what are you talking about? I have more than 7 stories sitting in my inbox right now. So I think the reality is that any kind of reporting is only as good as the outreach, right? Because I can say that the city did not do a great job with language access during COVID on many, many things. This is an ongoing fight I have with City Hall. We had to ask for every ounce of help we got. And for the Asian American community, we asked for some type of community education, on what to report, how to report, when to report. Starting in January, the city moved late, way too late. And what they waited for, I don't know. Our demands were because we've already seen what happens in our community, because the South Asian, Muslim, Arab part of our community, we saw what happened with them after 9/11. And so we already had, an example of how not to do something correctly, and how to do something right, and how to get in front of things much faster. And so that didn't happen. I'm happy that the Asian hate crimes has been formed. I think we do need to start to look at what language resources there are. But I think, there are a lot of mechanisms in the city that always becomes this default. Everybody keeps saying, oh, call 311, call 311. The funny story is that I was on a call with NYPD brass, and they were talking about this very issue. And they said, call 311, if you have anything to report, call 311. And we were laughing because somebody just walked in as this meeting was starting because something happened in Chinatown, right? And they're calling 311, the phone's been busy for half an hour, right? So at some point, even the mechanism that's supposed to, facilitate reporting gets clogged up. I think besides language access, we need to think about, our community, the fear of interaction, fear of, a lot of Asian immigrants come from countries where, you don't have relationships with the police, you don't report things, or there's lack of information about the legal process, there's cultural sensitivity in reporting, all of these are very real challenges that never really got addressed in an effective way from the get-go.
You mentioned, the different subgroups within the Asian community, and obviously New York is an extremely diverse city with many different, people from different backgrounds. Have you noticed a difference of approach or a difference in reaction or just experiences being different for the various subgroups within the Asian community during this crisis?
I think, as much as I want to say yes, I think anybody who looked East Asian, we were scared. Racists don't know the difference between Koreans and Chinese and, Nepalese and Filipino. And, one of the things that, this issue is really complex. We were terrified all the time. I mean, Chris Kwok is on this call, but Chris is on my board. And, when we would check in, we would say, my God, we would whisper these prayers of thank God nobody's been killed, right? Because it just became so scary. People going to work, essential workers, healthcare workers, to the grocery workers, they were all going to work and they were having to ride, public transit, and what that looked like. The other issue also, what made it complicated too was the immigration fears in our community, because we had ICE patrolling neighborhoods while all of the COVID stuff was going on. And so, that the only people who were really going out were the essential workers or the undocumented community who had no choice but to go to work. And we know that from statistics that have been released that the Chinese are the #1 most deported in New York City. So, that became very scary for so many New Yorkers. And, I can tell you our members who work in these Chinese enclaves were saying, they just had this, lists and lists of people coming in and saying, this is what happened to me, this is what happened to me. And the thing that the one thing that we did ask NYPD was, could you connect us with some of the precinct commanders, right? Because people aren't going to report it. And there were things that needed to be reported. They said yeah, and that was the end of that. The answer was yeah, and that's where we stopped. So I think there's a lot of frustration. I hope to God that we use this as an opportunity to figure out how to reach to communities that don't have relationships with police, don't have relationships with law enforcement. Language access is a very real thing. I mean, there's a lot of lessons here that we need to look at. So, I'll stop here.
Great. Well, let me ask Joe if you could give us a little bit of background on, how the definitions work. Like, what exactly constitutes a hate crime? We touched upon that a little bit earlier in looking at the data, but I think it would be useful, particularly since our audience has a legal background, to understand how these terms are used, from a law enforcement standpoint.
Yeah. So everyone can hear me, right? I think we just got a question from someone, I know Stewart had answered it as well, asking about why certain things were classified as hate crimes and not. I think that kind of dovetailed into what Russell and John were speaking about. We've got a lot of hate incidents, but not necessarily, they wouldn't necessarily qualify as hate crimes. So since we are talking about crimes, we're talking about very specific offenses that have elements that have to be proved. In this context, I can only talk about New York. This is a New York CLE, so I'll be discussing essentially how New York law breaks down the hate crimes issue. So actually, is there any way, Doctor, that you could put those statistics back up? Because I think it might be a little illustrative. I'll just keep going anyway, but if you can get that up, that'd be great. So hate crimes, generally speaking, people understand the hate crime statute to be this one statute. It's actually called the hate crime statute, Penal Law 485.05. The broad-based sort of elements that you have to satisfy are, there's one of two things you have to show: that a person was selected for a crime to be committed against them based on a belief or perception about their race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender, et cetera, et cetera. It's, it's catch-all, it gets everything. Or that a person commits an act construing an offense on the person in a substantial part because of a belief or perception regarding the catch-all, race, et cetera, ethnic origin, all those things. So what you might have not heard from what I just described is the actual crimes themselves. And that's because the hate crime statute, as it's written in New York, is really more a sentencing enhancement statute as opposed to an actual hate crime statute. So if you're already committing what would be termed a crime, so for example, an assault, we have certain things on here that would qualify as crimes within New York, like an assault, that means causing physical injury, or attempting to cause physical injury to another person, or graffitis on there, for example, damaging property would also qualify. Anything that would qualify as a quote unquote crime, something that a person could actually be arrested for, those cases, which a lot of the crimes I just mentioned to you in their lowest state, they're really just misdemeanors that face up to a year in jail. But in practice, like, rarely is jail time actually attributed to a misdemeanor charge. Now, felonies, it can become a felony if we can prove that misdemeanor as a hate crime. And in order to show that it was in fact a hate crime, we have to go beyond simply the circumstances that exist at the time. Although those are factors, I think a lot of offices in the police department is going to look at this in terms of your jury pool and who you're going to be making these arguments in front of, and also what we'll be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that there can't be a reason that makes sense, essentially, that something else could be true. So just laying the circumstances and saying, oh, well, the president had said some things that day, and I'm Asian walking down the block, and this white person just beats me up for no reason. I'm a stranger. He had no reason to beat me up. and I was wearing a mask, he wasn't. All of those things, to anyone listening to this call, is like, yeah, we know why it happened, but knowing why it happened is different than proving beyond a reasonable doubt the element that that act was intentionally committed in whole or in substantial part because of a belief or perception about the person's race or ethnicity. So unless there are, there's evidence indicating what was going on in his mind at the time, usually it's tough to add that hate crimes sentencing enhancement to the charge. It would still be an assault, it would still be the underlying crime, but if you attach the hate crime aspect to it, you want to be able to go in front of the judge and point to something more than mere circumstances for the most part. So either an admission from the defendant, or the defendant was saying something during the course of the crime. So for example, they were saying something along the lines of, well, whatever it is that they were saying, we need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that's exactly what was said by that individual. So we have to allege facts with particularity. So you can't simply say that it was a racial slur or it was something like. We actually have to say exactly what was said at that time. So one thing that's really important to understand with hate crimes is it is a really fact-specific analysis. And I think sometimes that also is part of it. The weight of the evidence that we can show it was actually for that purpose. And also you're dealing a lot of the times with victims where English is their second language, and perhaps their recollection of the exact words becomes skewed either in talking to the officer or that back and forth, especially when other agencies get involved or other victim support groups get involved and the story gets retold, and maybe it's a press case and there's another sort of version of what was said. Those are all factors that can come into play. Now, there's another statute in New York that elevates what would typically be not an arrestable crime, but would be more or less just a ticket. And that case would encompass, I think your chart, doctor, said approximately 80% of the survey respondents said that they had met with some kind of verbal assault, or that they were harassed in some way verbally. Now, a lot of those things, like go back to China, the COVID, Kung Flu, all of those things generally won't constitute a crime because under New York law, a verbal sort of assault, if you will, elevates to a crime when it is based on a perception about the person's race and is directed in that way, and it involves a threat or potentially an attempt to strike, shove, kick, or otherwise subject the other person to physical conduct or to physical contact with the intent to harass, annoy, or alarm the other person. So, in other words, if during the course of that verbal assault, they are threatening you physical harm, and we can prove that, that is no longer just a verbal threat. That raises itself now to a misdemeanor, a crime where the individual can be arrested. So those are the two large sort of groups of statutes that deal with hate crimes. And I think that at least in New York, when understood from that perspective, I'm looking at this chart and thinking to myself, if some of these incidents were both reported and there was a way to actually find out who the perpetrator was, they ultimately could end up being arrests for crimes. So I think that there's an issue with reporting. There's also an issue with the knowledge of the responding police officers of the crime that I was just describing, which was a misdemeanor, is actually called aggravated harassment, which normally doesn't entail this type of behavior. So it's not a crime that a normal patrol officer would encounter and be able to make an arrest for. But it's also a function of the evidence that's collected. As you can tell with a verbal threat, being able to recite exactly what was said or as close to what was said as possible and to show that this incident had actually occurred is a really important factor involved in that crime. So to the extent that you can document it, be it through video or some type of evidence, or even as a bystander, that certainly augments the ability for us to then follow up and make an arrest on those crimes. So I think that this will give you a little perspective and somewhat of a long-winded answer to why something is a hate crime versus a hate incident or a bias incident, and why some of these numbers may be underreported. And there are things that we can do, you know, as institutions, as DA's offices, as the police department, and as outreach groups. But there's also things that are a function simply of the law and the way that, and the function of criminal law generally, that can help you put into perspective why we are where we are.
Right. Joe, that was really, really helpful. We did get a question, and I think it would help the audience understand when speech is not categorized as a hate crime or hate incident because of First Amendment concerns, and where's the line there between the right of someone to...
Okay, so the issue of what's First Amendment and what isn't, the touch point usually comes to threats of physical violence. So as I described, one of the crimes requires a threat of physical violence. Oh, I forgot to mention also, on that list, Doctor, you also included a large category of spitting and coughing. That would also qualify under what I described as the Aggravated Harassment Statute. That's, I forgot to put that into the record. That's Penal Law 240. Hold on one second, sorry. Penal Law 240-30. That's aggravated harassment in the second degree. That's the statute that I've been talking about that penalizes people for physical contact or attempts to make physical contact. So a spit towards that misses but has the chance of hitting would qualify within that category. So the statute is written in a way that it's pretty broad. There are basically the touchstone of what's First Amendment versus not First Amendment comes down to whether or not it's threats and whether or not it rises. Well, in this case, in the crime sense, it has to be an attempt to cause physical contact or a threat to do the same, and it has to be done intentionally with the intention of harassing, annoying, and alarming the other person.
And I do want to mention that in the written materials that were circulated to the audience, some of the statutes that Joe just spoke about are included for your reference. Let's talk now to Deputy Inspector Liu so that you can give us a little color of what you've been doing as head of the Asian Hate Crime Task Force. Can you tell us a bit about your roles and responsibilities and the mandate of that task force?
Good morning, Karen. Thank you for having me. So the task force was actually formed not last month, but the end of April, and it went operational as of May. And since then, we were formed because of the spike in the incidents, not incidents. Actually, Professor Jeung had made a distinction between incident and crimes. When it reaches a level of crime, that's when our statisticals. That's when we come in and we start taking our stats and start our investigation. So we noticed that the first incident, March 10th, was the first COVID incident where Asian Americans were being targeted for verbal abuse, physical assaults, and we saw a big spike in those numbers. It went from, obviously, it was 3 of 2019. And as of today, we have 26 incidents versus 3 for the same period last year. So it's a huge number. And this is on a backdrop of a total of 35% decrease in total hate crimes. So while everyone is experiencing a decline in hate crimes, Asian Americans has seen an uptick. So This task force was formed because the NYPD really didn't have the mechanism in place for intake of these complaints because of the cultural barriers, the language differences, and the Detective Bureau is the bureau that investigates these crimes, and they're largely unequipped to handle victims who are not able to speak the language. So this task force was formed to address all those issues. So I just wanted to answer one of the questions that someone had asked. This was about the grandmother in Brooklyn that was set on fire. Obviously, that was a crime. That was not an incident. That was a crime, and we made an arrest on that crime. I don't know if you guys ever heard, but there was two 13-year-old boys that was arrested, and that was not classified as a hate crime. And that was, as Joe was going through the details of what a hate crime is, and just to surmise what he has said, it has to be racially motivated, meaning that the crime occurred only for the sole reason of the person's race or gender or sexual orientation. And the second part of that, which adds a wrinkle to everything, is we have to be able to prove that. A lot of times when these crimes happen, you kind of know it's a hate crime, but if there's no evidence to support it, we can't classify as such. And that's why the classifications and the statistics might seem skewed. There's another comment here that says, it seems like hate crimes are only when victims are Black and the perpetrators are not Black. So I'm just going to give you statistics. The number one group of victims for hate crimes is Jewish, with 38% of the total hate crimes in New York City. The second would be the Blacks at 15%. The third, right behind the Blacks with the coronavirus, are the Asians at 14%, followed by all others. So just, we all have implicit biases, but these statistics are accurate as of September 14th. So the mandate of the Asian Hate Crime Task Force is we help the overall, it's a subunit of the overall hate crime task force. And our job is to assist the hate crimes detectives who are having problems with victims who don't speak English, who are having problems with victims who do not want to cooperate, because that's a very big issue. And that was talked about earlier, about the cultural differences, about immigration status, and the criminal justice process is very daunting. It's you have to be interviewed numerous times. You have to come into the precinct. You got to talk to the detectives. It might not be the same detectives you talk to, because the detectives that come to the scene, the detective that catches the case might be different. The detective that shows the photo array might be a different detective. And then you got to go to the DA's office. It's just a long process. So with this unit, I have somebody sign to our victim. They kind of walk them through the process and they get the cooperation. They do the interview. They do whatever is necessary to get the case done. So it's not exclusive to hate crimes. They will help out on any kind of crimes, whether it's robbery, grand larceny, sexual assaults. So this group has been a great tool. We've been helping out. We're up to like 20-something cases. 2 days ago, we have elderly female Asian in Flushing who was shot in the head while she was collecting cans. She only spoke Fukuese. So a member of the task force went over there, conducted a very good interview. We got a lot of good information from that. That case is a very tough case, because normally the detective would not be able to communicate with her, and she would have to do it through a translator. And it's very tough. Things get lost in translation. You can't build that rapport with the victim using a translator. And a translator can't build rapports because they're just passing on the message. So this unit is to bridge the gap between investigations, the police, to the community and our victims. And I think we've been doing a really good job, and I think it's long overdue that this unit is in place.
With respect to the perception or the question from the audience about hate crimes against Asians versus other groups in New York City, I think there's been a perception that incidents that involve Asian victims are treated differently, maybe not assumed to be hate crimes or not investigated as hate crimes relative to how other groups are treated. and that the early reporting on the grandma, made no mention of a potential, racial aspect to it, even though I think the community thinks it's quite obvious. Whether or not it can be prosecuted is a different story, but that the incident itself wasn't reported out as a potential hate crime. I think that ruffled, feathers and made people think that either the law enforcement or the press weren't taking these issues seriously enough. Can you speak to how behind the scenes incidents involving victims of different racial backgrounds are treated, and if there is a difference in approach with respect to Asians?
Investigations are handled all the same way. Every step is done, whether it's a hate crime, whether it's not a hate crime, it's done the same way. You got to interview the complainant. You got to look for forensics. You got to look for video. You got to look for witnesses. Of course, with Asian victims, there's a lot of hurdles. They don't want to cooperate. Usually, they don't even want to make the report. Like this incident in Brooklyn with the grandmother, she didn't want to make the report. She was coerced by her family members. Please make the report. This is serious. And once she made that report, she was very reluctant to return phone calls to the detective. It wasn't until one of my guys who spoke to her in Cantonese that she was able to open up. So as far as what you mentioned is, the perception is that Asian victims aren't getting the same treatment as other victims. We're not getting the kind of customer service, if you will. But I think putting this task force will kind of rectify that, right? We have the right people in place now. And I kind of agree with you in the sense that the Asian victim wasn't getting the kind of support from the police department as they used to. It's because the police department was unequipped. They didn't have the people that spoke the language. When I first came on 21 years ago, I was one of maybe 200 Asian officers. Now we have over 2,000. Now we're more equipped, so we can help the Asian community. And I think this task force will kind of put us on even ground in that sense. Your screen froze. I don't know if you guys can still hear me.
Yeah, sorry, my unmute function got frozen for a minute. Thanks so much, Deputy Inspector Liu. There has been a question, I guess, posed about whether or not there's greater education and training going on, particularly since the pandemic, to try to address some of the issues you yourself have framed in terms of police officers working with the community to try to address this rise in hate crimes and incidents.
Well, along with the task force, we partner up with our Community Affairs Bureau, and the Community Affairs Bureau have been reaching out to the communities within New York City, in Brooklyn, and Queens, and Manhattan. I myself have been attending these meetings. We've been reaching out to the community. We've been reaching out to the Asian American media, and they've been putting out information. So in terms of education, that's how we're doing it. We're getting it out in face-to-face meetings, community council meetings, and we're putting it out to the media. And you're hosting events such as this. So we're getting the word out. This is all part of the education process. Education will lead to, awareness, and eventually lead to prevention.
Karen, I'd like to add too, we just released this whole set of bystander training and de-escalation tactics. We now that people are going back to work and we're out and about and there are more people out, I think one of the things that we need to understand is certain things you don't have to call law enforcement, right? And you don't have to call the police. There are, somebody's harassing you on the subway, there are ways you as a bystander, there are things that you can do. And so we did a whole series and we of one-pagers, and we did it with the Center for Anti-Violence Education. They've been amazing teaching all of the de-escalation tactics and bystander training. So it's in language, in many different Asian languages. Please, I hope it's a useful resource because getting it translated was tough. And it's a resource. And I know that the Asian media has picked it up, but I think it's really important for folks, especially, you know, the English speakers in our community to be able to understand that, and because we are out about, and so if anything ever happens, you know, we're the first ones who actually have the capacity to stand up. So there are other resources other than, you know, so many things are not crimes, right? And so
Right.
there are incidents, and so I think those are the reasons we do need to look at other resources.
Wonderful idea.
I was wondering if you might happen to know whether there has been a rise in crimes against Asians generally, setting aside what's actually classified as a hate crime. I mean, I think we all know those statistics seem low, you know, because of some of the hurdles you have in categorization and prosecution. But in general, has there been a rise in crimes against Asians that, you know, we could, you know, comment on and perhaps is related to the COVID-19 pandemic, even if it's not officially a hate crime?
Actually, those numbers have gone down. Asians are generally targeted for, you know, for financial gain. So our robberies and our grand larcenies have been going down because of COVID. There's less people in the street. There's less stores that are open. So overall, crime has gone. I know shootings and the violence has gone up. Homicides has gone up. But property crimes and theft has gone down. With that being said, Asian are being targeted at a disproportionate rate. I believe, I'm not sure what the exact population of Asians are in the city, but
16%.
15?
16.
16%. I believe the percentage of Asian victims is higher than the proportion, you know, it's disproportionate. I think there's 20% of Asian victims. It's slightly higher than the total population. But of course, the Asian perpetrators is like 1% of, we don't have Asians running around robbing other people. So that's a good thing, I would say. But to answer your question, there's a rise in hate crimes, but there's not a rise in other crimes against Asians.
Joe needs to be unmuted.
Oh, can I do that? Do I do that?
No. It's our
Okay.
Margaret needs to do that. I think they're trying to control the background noise.
I have put the unmute for Joe. So Joe, can you do it again?
Yeah, try it again, Joe. Great.
Sorry, I just wanted to make the distinction because, you know, we're all lawyers in the room and we're throwing around a lot of, so the numbers that the deputy inspector is putting forward isn't crime, right? We're not omniscient. We don't know all the crimes that are out there. What he can talk about is what's reported, and there's certain reporting criteria within the NYPD to even get on his list. So this is in terms, so when he says, for example, that 38% of hate crimes reported or against Jewish people, that's what's reported out of the total amount that have been reported and meet the criterion to get in there. So I don't want to get too into the, you know, into the weeds about statistics, but I just want, you know, the audience and everyone in the room to clearly communicate that I think everyone in here recognizes there's a lot going on and that there's a lot that's not getting reported. You know, one of the earliest incidents that happened in Forest Hills, Queens, the article specifically said at the bottom that the victim who had taken a video of the incident and had been threatened in front of his child and punched in front of his child was planning on not reporting it, that he's still considering whether or not he's going to go to the police. And I think part of that, you know, is that's self-imposed. I think in, you know, certain cultural circles, that's just something that happens. We don't report certain instances. I think a lot of the immigrant community, especially the undocumented immigrant community, that is probably facing a lot of this as well. The people who are actually out there and working, those essential workers who are facing a lot of these incidents, they're going to be loath to, you know, bring forward a claim if their English isn't great. I mean, all of those things are going to be factors as to why, you know, maybe they're showing up on Dr. Jung's report, maybe they're not, but they're, you know, not showing up in the NYPD's reporting, and they're not showing up as complainants within the NYPD structure.
Okay, that's very helpful. Professor Jeung, as an academic in Asian American studies and the sociology of race, I'm wondering if you have any insights into how this current set of events related to the pandemic fits into kind of a broader historical context of sort of the place of Asian Americans in American society and how they've been treated historically. We need to unmute the professor. Can you try again? Margaret, maybe we can just leave everyone unmuted and we'll monitor the noise. This is.
Everyone unmuted.
Okay.
This is John. I got unmuted. I'm not sure if Russell did, because I see him still as muted right now.
Okay, Russell will probably have to come back in.
Oh.
He just,
Just,
Oh, we lost him. Oh, he's back.
he's here.
Still muted though.
Okay, thanks for unmuting me. So the question is, has this been a historic pattern? And it's clear, and that's why we created Stop API Hate, that Asian American status in the US is conditional, that we see and experience in periods of war, like Japanese American incarceration, in times of economic downturn, saying that white workers have their jobs taken away, like when Vincent Chin was killed, and in times of epidemic, the bubonic plague, cholera, and that was one of the main bases for the Chinese Exclusion Act. So we knew that Asians would be harassed and met with interpersonal violence when COVID-19 came. And we also realized that we would be met with racist policies, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the internment of Japanese Americans, the detention of Muslims after 9/11. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. These thousands of incidents of hate violence, not necessarily hate crimes, but a lot of incidents of hate. And we're having the immigration ban. We had the ban of WeChat. We have the ban of international students. And so my concern is broader than just hate crimes and addressing the issue as a hate crime issue. It's a clear racism that's spiked because of these conditions that we have to address. And that's fueled by the political rhetoric that gives people license to hate. And so if you want to get to the source of the racism now, you have to really address these root causes about political rhetoric, about addressing the yellow peril stereotypes that people have, their fears of the pandemic and their fears of Asian people. And we need a lot more public education and a lot more ethics, for example, to teach empathy and to understand racism. Now, do I have the time to suggest what we're trying to do in California as an alternative approach to hate and crime enforcement?
Sure.
Sure. So because we're sheltered in place, and like the other speaker said, a lot of the incidences we're hardly going out. But when we do go out, we're getting harassed and attacked. And those are at corporate retail places. When we go shopping, that's when we're getting harassed. And in that sense, we're not getting public accommodations. We're not getting safe access to goods and services. And in some states, you have civil rights protections. And in California, we have pretty good protections. But there's no national civil rights protections at private businesses. But in California, because you can't discriminate at private businesses, we can argue that if we get harassed at a store, for example, whether it's the employee mistreating the customer or customers mistreating other customers, that means we're denied safe access to goods and services. It's not necessarily a felony case that we could, prosecute as a hate crime, but it is a civil rights violation that we can pursue and get mediation for.
Slight.
Get restitution either from the corporate retail place, we could get money from the other customers. And so we're pursuing that route, better enforcements of civil rights violations. And because we have a supportive agency working, we're going to actually look for impact cases where we pursue it in that route. It's an alternative. It's has more of a restorative justice model rather than a criminalizing the perpetrator model. And we think it could be effective. And so we're pursuing that route. Not only can we just address the individual, it's more of a systemic approach, so that maybe the corporate retail store has to be accountable, and beyond just putting up signs about physical distancing, they should put up signs about treating all customers with respect and dignity. So public education, working in our schools with ethnic studies, not again suspending the bullies, but actually using restorative justice to teach people more empathy, working on civil rights cases. That's how we're trying to approach it, putting up more signage. In New York, there's a lot of public transit issues, right? And because there's so much density and because people are in close proximity, just again, signage and reminders for people to treat each other well. Like John said, words matter. And so now, because of the rhetoric from the top gives people license to hate, sadly, we need reminders to treat people with a little bit more respect. And so these public education campaigns work. They work when they tell people not just be nice, but when they give people recommendations of how to behave in different ways. So this recommendation about having bystander intervention, that actually is effective. Like if you see something, do something. Those types of public ed efforts are helpful.
Thank you so much. Did you see a difference in the East Coast versus West Coast data coming in? I'm just curious. We saw the national versus New York, but just curious if the West Coast had an actual completely different reporting.
Yeah, there are different trends. Actually, New York and San Francisco are similar because you have high concentrations of Asian Americans who are actually educated and racially conscious. So they'll know discrimination when they see it. So New York and DC has really good reporters. They have really detailed incidents. So in urban educated areas with Asians, there's actually higher reporting because the Asians there report more. And then, we get less in the South. We're going to actually create a heap of where we have higher rates of racism, and we're going to create a racial vulnerability scale. Like what's driving the uptick? Is it an increase in immigrants? Is it an increase in COVID, so that the fear of COVID is causing the racism? Is it the political orientation of the people? Is it gentrification? And so we're working on that. We have anomalous sites where you can expect so much racism. But again, New York and San Francisco are similar because we have high public transit use and dense cities and a lot of racial groups interacting.
Great. Joanne and John as well, I mean, do some of the ideas that Professor Jeung suggested work for New York? Are there any unique challenges to the New York community, and what are your thoughts on what New Yorkers and New York politicians and local leaders should be doing during this time?
I think the public accommodation, we have, we've addressed that. I think one of the very first trainings we had was New York State Commission on Human Rights. And they said, if you go to the bank and there's discrimination, you can go ahead and report that. But the problem I'll say is the reporting. People are so shy to tell their stories. And this is not just immigrants, but even English speakers. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people, Asian Americans, where English wasn't a problem. A language wasn't a problem, right? And so they can tell me their stories, they're professionals, but yet nobody wants to talk to media, nobody wants to report anything, right? And so there are days when I'm thinking like, oh my God, I'm screaming at media to say, cover our stories, this is what's happening. And yet if nobody steps forward, it makes me look crazy, right? Like, are you just pulling these stories out of thin air? But the stories that I'm hearing are truly horrific. And it needs to be addressed, and we need to be able to explain what is happening. I think, the days of, this all goes to the model minority myth. We keep our head down, right? We don't talk about anything. We don't complain. nothing is gonna help us. Like help isn't coming, right? If you don't complain, like this is America where squeaky wheel gets the grease. And this is truly, what is happening in our community. It's just horrible. And unless we say, I've been wronged, something is happening to me, or I need to go to the bank and I need to feel safe, and nobody's addressing it and people ignore it. And there was a case like that was reported. And it's not the fact that the bank employee didn't care. They just didn't have the wherewithal. So they said, they didn't have the training. So we need to, Professor Jeung is right, we need to make people responsible, but it requires people to step forward and talk to the media. I mean, all the media friends, I've made so many friends in the media now, and they'll say, we won't use their real name, we'll give it like, but nobody wants to come forward. And that's really a problem, because it makes our work as advocates, Dr. Jeung, John, me, all of our, the NYPD, it makes our work that much harder if you don't share your story in public to say, yeah, this is me. The stories are not just the Chinese grandmother. It is like every professional, every walk, of life. And, in the beginning, I was afraid to leave my house because my neighbors would say things for wearing a mask. And so I tell that story not to say, oh my gosh, look at me, but it's to say it happens to everybody. It happens to all of us because of the way we look. And so it requires that we step forward to say, everybody, people who look like us are targeted, and we need to have resources and we need to feel safe in our own neighborhoods. So I think that is the biggest challenge, is like, how do we have this buy-in that, stop being afraid. We don't make progress unless we demand progress.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, let me jump in. Yeah, I just following up on what Joanne and Dr. Jeung are saying, and thinking about it from the global to the micro, if you will. On the global, Dr. Jung's absolutely right. And this goes to what Joanne said as well, is we toggle between being the so-called model minority and the yellow peril. I mean, that's the bottom line, is that we fall into one or the other. We are never seen as Americans in a normal sense, if you will. It's that to throw out another cliche, it's that perpetual foreigner aspect, right? And so we have to break through in terms of the narrative to get around that, to sort of really get into an understanding of America is made up of all of these different parts, these diverse parts. And that's what makes our country great. That's also what makes our country complicated, but that's okay, right? So that's number one. Number two about the global is I caution people, because I certainly said it myself as that some of the words that matter come from the top, but let's also be real. Even if we have a different leader at the top after November, this isn't going to change, because the global tension between the Chinese government and the United States is real. And there's real reasons for that. That's legitimate for a reason. But we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to be able to criticize the Chinese government while also saying it's not okay to be a racist. It shouldn't be that hard, but sometimes all of our politicians have trouble doing that. And we need to hold them accountable for how they talk about our communities. So that's what I would think about in terms of the global. And that's also where all of you can help. I expect, because this is Albany, a number of you guys might be involved in campaigns, whether it's at the national or the local level. So make sure to hold the people that you are working with accountable for how they're talking about these issues. Again, it's legitimate to talk about some of these global tensions, but it's not legitimate to make it a stereotype or make these broad classifications. Then at the micro, I think a couple of people alluded to it. Number one is, so one of the things our organization has done is actually offer bystander intervention training, so that people are in a position, if they see an act of hate, to do something about that. And over these last 4.5 months, we've actually trained over 15,000 people. And that's a good start. I say it's a start because obviously there's a huge population out there that could benefit from things like this. And for me, one of the beautiful things about this is it's not only empowering people to act in a safe way if they see acts of hate, but it's empower those individuals that got the training, be like, hey, I'm in control of this a little bit more. I know what I can do. And this is certainly something, again, all of you as lawyers, I would think would be more comfortable with than even oftentimes the general populace. And so that's something I would offer in terms of what can be done during this moment. And then the last piece is on this media piece. And again, here I think all of you can have a special role to play. Look, oftentimes when the media reports about these hate incidents, it's great that they're reporting about them. It's great that they're reporting on Dr. Jung's statistics, our statistics, and that statistics matter, but then the stories matter too, right? Because that really humanizes it. And that could come from the grandmothers, absolutely. But you know what? When Bill Lee, who probably many of you guys know at WilmerHale, managing partner of WilmerHale, talked about his own incident of discrimination at a gasoline station, that had a specific resonance. Number one, he already has a national profile, so he is able to get attention to it. Number two, you don't think of professionals like us, so to speak, as being targeted, whereas we are, right? So if you guys are willing to speak out about incidents that you've faced, or that your parents face, or that your children face, and even if it's to your fellow partners and associates, that helps to change that narrative. If you could help people get comfortable, and our organization, I think Joanne's been doing quite a bit of this as well, provide media training to people that might be willing to talk to the media, but are just not yet comfortable. That's another piece, because then if we could tell those individual stories, that will break through in terms of the narrative change as well. And then obviously, if you as lawyers encounter these incidents and you're willing to speak publicly about it in some way, talk to Joanne, talk to Dr. Jeung, talk to me, and it's not about, don't think about it as your own personal glory. It's about helping the community. It actually is about helping the community and getting that personal narrative out there, because that will make a difference. Thanks.
All right, from the law enforcement perspective, I do have to provide the caveat that I actually agree with both of you guys. This is a huge issue. There's very few people who are willing to talk to the press. So if you have them and they're willing to tell their stories, it's really important that we're part of a national conversation. From speaking for myself and probably the deputy inspector, you're not doing any favors to the case itself. Every time you go on record talking about an incident, and I think Vincent, the homicide, in the past, there have been instances where people have told their story and received help about telling their story, and the version that makes it out to the press is a little bit fluffier than the original one, or significantly or even insignificantly different from the version that was originally told to the police. And then when it comes time for trial, those different versions of the story are essentially used to paint the person who's telling the story as a liar or an embellisher, adding facts to fit within certain things that may be seen as holes in the case. For example, saying, oh yeah, he said chink, or he said gook, or, any one of these, racial slurs, and then that word changes over time, or, that was a word that, couldn't have been used by the individual for one reason or another, then that can create an issue later. So all I would say is that for those of you, and you know what, quite frankly, these groups that are going out there, John, Professor Jeung, and certainly Joanne, they're aware of the Vinny Chin disaster, unfortunately, and what can happen. So that they'll certainly have a mind towards, like, if you're going to speak to the press, make sure the story is the one that you told the police, and it's the one that you're going forward with, and it's said in a way that can't then ruin the case. So just keep that in the back of your mind. That is definitely a concern.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think for me, I'm speaking to more that 70, 80%, that really probably those individuals are not interested in pursuing the enforcement route, or even the lawsuit route that we've talked about in terms of getting restitution, et cetera. It is more that level of, okay, clearly there's a wrong, I understand, and especially within this legal community, I understand that there's not really a case to be had about it, but at the same time, lifting up those incidents is important. So you're right, is all of us as advocates also need to figure out, okay, what is it that this individual, what is it that this victim wants? How does that mesh with what our community needs? And kind of navigating that, because you're absolutely right, is if they are interested in criminal prosecution, and if they are interested in civil litigation, that is very different in terms of what quote unquote media strategy we all might come up with, than if they're saying, no, I understand this is not what I want to pursue, but man, I really want to tell my story.
I mean, one incident that has gotten some publicity in New York is Judge Chu, who was hit riding by a bicyclist, walking to work. Deputy Inspector Liu. So there have been some reporting, I guess. Yes, maybe we should meet him. Oh. We're speaking Mandarin, so
Yes, I know.
it's amazing, right? I mean, I know there have also been reports of judges making, racist comments, which obviously doesn't help the goal of justice. And has there been sort of community, I guess, response to some of these incidents going back? Deputy Inspector Liu, I just mentioned that Judge Chu's incident on her way to work is an example of a lawyer judge who has been a victim of an incident or a crime here. Do you have any more information about that particular case that you could share with us?
Yeah, so she's definitely a victim of a crime, but as far as a hate crime, we have no evidence to indicate as such. The speculation is the perpetrator felt that the judge was in her way and just punched her. He was aggravated, punched her, and he took off. So I did put a lot of resources into this case because, perception, right? And that she's a judge. So there was a lot of love given to this case, and I can't tell you too much about the details, but we do have a person of interest. He's on a city bike, so we're kind of tracking where it went, and hopefully we'll have an arrest within the next couple of weeks. No promises though. Okay.
Understood. And Deputy Inspector, I know there's been a lot, in the national dialogue, people being angry with law enforcement, with the police generally. On the other hand, we're trying to do more, and you and your task force has tried to do more. How do you guys handle the sort of inherent tension with people not wanting the police involved and wanting to defund the police and all those types of that sentiment versus wanting more policing and wanting more police involvement, and how do you juggle those things from?
So I can't speak for every police officer. I speak for myself. I could speak for most of the detectives here that work with me. We're professionals. We understand. People are angry. They want to lump all police officers as the same. I believe the NYPD is a little bit different from other departments. But NYPD is the most diverse department in the country, the largest department. We have officers speaking over 100 different languages. We are majority minority police department. So I think with all the anti-police sentiment that's going on now, we'll take it and we'll get better from it. So it comes and goes. I get that people are angry, man. Maybe we can do better as a whole. But people need to understand that judging the whole by a few, it's discrimination. You can't fight discrimination with more discrimination. So I just need people to keep an open mind. We are here to help. I wasn't born a police officer. I was born into the Asian community. When I retire, I'm going to be a resident, a city resident. I'm still going to be Asian. I will be a police officer. So I'm here to help the residents and the people in New York City. So people need to understand that we're just here to help. And of course, there's going to be incidents where it may not seem that way, but when you dig a little deeper, there's always more to the story.
Thank you for that comment, and that actually brings a lot of things together. I'm wondering if other of the panelists would like to talk about some final thoughts that they may have on this issue, and we can continue answering questions, of course. But wanted to give everyone an opportunity, given the time. I don't know, Professor Jeung, would you like to say a few things?
Sure, thanks. So as you can see, this issue is a lot broader than hate crime enforcement or even targeting Asians for crime. It's a political issue that we have to address, and we have to vote if we're against hate mongering. It's an educational issue that we have to train our youth with empathy, with social emotional learning skills. In fact, we actually had a national youth campaign where we had 90 students nationwide collect over 1,000 stories of youth. And so when we talk about reporting, our young people are really outspoken. And what they found was that 90% or 80% of Asian American youth are actually angry at this moment. So you don't think of Asian Americans as being angry, but they are. And our young people are angry not only about how Asian Americans are being treated at the moment, they're angry about Black Lives Matter. And so Asian Americans are the racial group who are most in favor for the Black Lives Matter movement after African Americans. So Asian Americans get this notion of racism. They understand systemic injustices. They actually acknowledge white supremacy, and the young people are speaking out. So if any of you and you want young people to speak and share their experiences, we have youth willing to do workshops. They're organizing their own national conference, and they're actually reporting, and they're telling their story. They're flipping the narrative like John recommends. So the issue is broader than just hate crimes, and as advocates, I think attorneys like yourselves in the audience could be really helpful for us at Stop API Hate. We're again trying to shift the approach from enforcing hate crimes, although that is a good approach, again, if the targeted person wants that approach. But we're actually culling all our incidents to find impact cases where we could like usher it through the Department of Fair Housing and Employment and try to find impact cases to have full mediation of those cases. So we need help from attorneys to figure out what are our best cases given our thousands of incidents. We need help, again, ushering people through the process of conflict resolution on the neighborhood level, right? So again, a lot of communities are at odds with one another, not be committing crimes against each other, but there's a lot of hate and racism. And so we need people who could actually help resolve conflicts on the community level. So we at Stop API Hate appreciate what Albany's been doing and hope that we would continue to lift up the collective voice of Asian Americans together. Thanks.
I'm gonna log my lobbying hours right now. We are a 501c3, but let me just, you know, we do, I am a registered lobbyist, so let me just say my piece. It is, you know, elected officials don't pay attention to our community because we have a lousy rate of voting. You know, there are, you know, it's the census, the Asian American community, we are, you know, like my office as a Census Information Center, we are like dragging people to answer 10 questions that's going to determine how we are going to be seen for the next 10 years, right? After this, it's going to, I mean, we have an election coming up, and are we going to vote in somebody who, you know, has really targeted our community? I mean, the reality is that the things that president says put a target on our backs, right? And so we need to look at, you know, there are things that you don't have to be an advocate, you don't have to be an attorney, you don't have to be a police officer. I mean, everyday citizens, you know, your everyday act of resistance is actually registering to vote, filling out the census, paying attention to what's happening in your community, because this is how we get the respect that our community has not gotten in a really long time. So I know the census is going to be, I know it's been extended, but you know, the lawsuit is going to be dragging on. I know my staff are all out today in Chinatown, getting people to fill it out. It's been, the Asian American community, it's scary, but it's really scary not to be, it's really scary to be ignored because, you know, there's no help coming unless you say, I demand this. So you know, I spent my 10 minutes logging in my lobbying hour. John and I, we know this because we have to do this regularly, but, you know, if you look at, you know, what John mentioned in the beginning about, you know, Grace May, you know, she led a House vote for condemnation of all the hate crimes, but there were so many of her colleagues who didn't stand with her. I mean, what kind of a person do you have to be as a leader to say, yeah, don't, you know, like hate is a horrible thing, don't be a racist. I mean, that is just basic human decency, right? But there were people who didn't vote with her, which doesn't shock me, but it shocks me. But you know, I hope the Asian American community remembers these are the things that are happening to us. And so when it comes to, you know, we have census, we have November, next year in New York City, we have citywide elections for mayor and council. these are the times we show up and we need to flex our muscle a little bit.
Thank you. John, you seem like you wanted to jump in with something, and I'm actually curious about the local sort of New York political scene and elections here, and whether there's anything of particular battleground issues that the audience needs to be aware of. But feel free to speak to what you were intending to speak to.
No, a lot of thoughts were going through my mind with respect to what Joanne was saying and Dr. Jeung was saying. I think, and I'm thinking about how, especially again, within this crowd, which is mainly of lawyers, how you can lean in. And I think the key here is thinking about sort of what special skills you have, what special superpowers, if you will, that you have. And what I'm thinking about is, from a nonpartisan side, would you be willing to serve as a poll worker? Obviously that requires you to put yourselves out a little bit with respect to physical safety. I understand that. But that is something that is essentially needed right now, that we need more poll workers for the in-person voting. Obviously you could serve as a poll monitor if you want to be a little bit more, partisan, if you will, about it in terms of protecting the vote. Joanne talked about census is, thinking about not just us. I would hope that everyone in this crowd has already responded to the census, but what about your parents? Have you been able to help your parents navigate that process? If you have adult children, have they done it? All of these little pieces, right, that really help to, again, change the narrative, because we are seen in all of these places. That makes a difference. And then with respect to sort of some of the local side, if you will, the New York side, on one level, right, New York is already sort of, in terms of the demographics, it's great. But then you think about the representation of the state legislatures, representation of the city councils, and I don't think that is representative of our community, right? And so what does that mean? Number one is, again, for the really good lawyers that are interested, redistricting. Not so much at the congressional level, but at the local level, so that you get an extra state legislative seat. And that's stuff that you guys, would have a technical capacity for, through Albany, through other organizations that other people might not be. And then you guys can explain it to our community in a way that other people might not be able to. So those are some of the thoughts that go through my mind. And then obviously, please, I know it's awkward sometimes, but take a moment to speak up in your own organizations. If you see a wrong, put yourself in a slightly uncomfortable situation and throw the flag, if you will. That's what I call it, is, hey, and you don't need to call them a racist, right, if they say Chinese virus. But say, hey, hey, that's wrong, that's not helpful. That really has been hurting our community. At least in the law firm context and some of the government agency context, I think the people that I've talked to about this, they've reacted relatively well. They get a little defensive, but they react relatively well. And again, if we don't speak up, how can we expect our community members that are even more vulnerable to speak up?
Great. All right, in our final minutes, perhaps, I don't know, Joe or Deputy Inspector Wu.
I wanted to tie the front to the back and just thank the efforts of Joanne, John, and the professor, because we've participated in prior events through Albany, and I wanted to thank you, Karen, for pushing Albany into this initiative. And I remember Joanne being very vocal about her meetings with the NYPD and putting them to task, and really being that loud voice in the room. And quite frankly, I think a lot of, the opportunity that we have in having an Asian hate crimes task force extension specifically to deal with the Asians, and getting Deputy Inspector Liu involved as the leader of that group and to push that forward is important on a number of fronts, and wouldn't have really been possible without somebody pushing against the door. I mean, I used to be in the city system. I know NYPD is a professional organization, and because it is so large, it's organized in a way that's, almost paramilitary, where each portion reports to another portion. And, making something new and making a commitment to that is something that, gums up the wheels. So that's not a small lift. That's something that takes work. And, after we get past this and COVID, there's going to be more work to be done, because the community needed an advocate before COVID, before, these incidents of Asian crime. So the work that they're doing on behalf of everyone listening to this is really important. So I'm not a registered lobbyist, so I won't be telling you where to put your money or your votes, but I will say that, you know, a lot of thanks needs to be laid on the people who are speaking up on our behalf. And then on the other side, in the case of Deputy Inspector Liu, the people who are now entrusted with, you know, the sacred duty to look after the interests and, you know, thinking of the victims, not just as crime victims who are coming in to report crimes, but, you know, your uncle, your grandmother, your sister, your brother, your child, and looking at them and treating them with the level of care. You know that if it wasn't a friendly face or someone who spoke their language or even didn't speak their language but didn't have that cultural sensitivity would be able to do. So and also, you know, let's not forget that also within NYPD, the opportunities for advancement, the opportunities to distinguish yourself as an officer are limited, you know, and having a unit like this, a specialized unit that you can get into, that's a really important thing. So I just wanted to thank really everyone on this call because just the establishment and the continued success of this unit, I think serves all of our goals.
Thank you, Joe. Deputy Inspector Liu, I do want to thank you, give you a special thanks for joining us today. It's extremely important that, sorry, he's muted. Can someone unmute him? But we do, you know, have great appreciation for the work that you've done personally and the work that the task force has done. I know these issues are extremely complex and there, you know, is a lot of difficult issues that are left to be resolved. But we did want to give a special thanks for you to joining us. And if you have any final thoughts, I'd certainly yield the floor to you.
Thank you. It's an honor being here. And just want to keep things positive. Things are much better than they were 40 years ago. 20 years later, things gotten better. Now, we're definitely moving in the right direction, but we still have more work to do. And I think part of the thing is we kind of need to change the way our culture is as a whole. Like you said earlier, we like to keep our head down. We don't want the spotlight. We just do our thing, but we have to be more vocal. And it's starting to happen. We see it in the media now. We see it on social media. People are speaking up, and that's a good thing. So I would say we have to get more into government work, to something that's improving, where our numbers are growing in the NYPD. I would encourage people to consider law enforcement, government, as you know, as a career. And when you get there, always consider advancement. You want to be in a position to make changes, not just demand them. You know, demanding is the first thing, but the change should come from within. We should have our own people come into the position where we can make actual changes. So thank you for having me, and look forward to speaking to everyone again.
Enough. There we go. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you all to the audience for participating in this very important discussion. And on behalf of Ebony, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend and enjoy the rest of the conference. Panelists, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Yep.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks.